So I originally made a video about, well, I made two videos about this controversy, about the whole Stop Killing Games initiative, the petition that's being signed for the EU. I made one video on it and one video about Piratesoftware's going over it. And again, my overall argument was, well, it's a petition. It's not really supposed to be like legally binding words, and again, things like terms of service also aren't legally binding. So I think that's fine. Like again, the problem is the situation of you buy a game but you don't own a game. Like you're buying a product that you no longer own, and for any reason, the company can either shut down the server or shut that shit down. And it happened to like The Crew, which is a game that Ubisoft absolutely could have made single player. And I think he's arguing from the basis of a smaller indie developer, not from like the side of the multi-billion-dollar company Ubisoft, right? He's kind of equating the game, the small like indie company, with Ubisoft's, the EAs of the world. And I don't think that's really the best way to portray yourself, because again, at the end of the day, the consumer just wants to have and own the products that he's paying money for. But, and I haven't watched this video yet, but the problem is the situation of, no, you do not own your games, you don't own anything, you're paying for the right to play it, but for any reason it can be taken away from you. And there are reasons that make sense, like if you're cheating or if you're selling the game, trying to make money off of it. But others just don't. Like again, they got rid of The Crew, and it's like, people paid money for that. They absolutely should be able to continue playing that game. And mostly multi-billion-dollar companies can afford to, have the server space to maintain massive games. Like indie developers just don't have that. But let's check out this video. Stop Killing Games 2.
Hi, my name is Jason Thorhall, also known as Piratesoftware, and the other day I put out a video called Stop Killing Games, saying why I would not support the initiative. Overall, it was actually quite positive. The analytics on it show that people really think it's a good idea. There's a huge amount of like ratio, and I received hundreds of comments from developers thanking me for putting it out because they can't speak publicly while they're at a business or a job elsewhere. A lot of the times, major companies will fire you if you are speaking out of turn and cause a PR disaster for those companies. And since this is such a popular thing among players, most devs aren't going to say anything to you. So I am. So let's discuss the most common requirement of the initiative, which is games have to be left in a functional, playable state. Now, what happens if that game is a online-only live service game? Well, if you want that to stay in a functional, playable state, that means the devs have to release either server binaries or somehow carve off the game to be a single-player experience now. Some way to keep it functional and playable, right? Now, many of you are requesting, yes, I should get the server binaries so that I can go and make private servers for this. But that doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. And the reason why is because it leaves developers open to abuse. So let's explore that a little bit. Let's say that you made your own video game, and you made a live service game. Maybe it's an MMO, maybe it's something else, right? And let's say that I want to monetize that game, but you don't allow monetization of the game by any other party. This makes sense because most creators don't allow for that. You can't just take someone else's art and profit off of it. Normal, right? So then I go, well, how am I going to force you to do this? Under this initiative, you would have to release the server binaries or keep the game in a functional, playable state at end of life. So I hit you with a ton of bots. I hit you with a ton of exploits. I attack your community. I destroy your Reddit. I go after your business. I go everywhere that I possibly can to make this cost as much as it possibly can.
Well, but that happens anyway. Now it's done for ideological reasons, right? People go after the community. People, I don't know about bots. I mean, again, the thing I brought up was Team Fortress 2 and their bots. But to be honest, the communities against that game, I'm going to turn this fan on because Lucy's getting hot. People are, again, against that, shitting on that game simply because of the bots, right? And again, you're arguing, you're arguing from the, per, like the, you're arguing from the perception of us indie developer, not a multi-billion-dollar company. Like the problem is you have multi-billion-dollar companies like Ubisoft who absolutely not really release the server binaries, but again, release things like a single player game, right? So even if the servers go down, you still have the game to play. You can still play the game. And that the problem is the product that, again, as a consumer, the product you're buying is now you cannot play, or the product you already bought, right? You cannot play now 10 years down the line. Like, I think that's what people want. And you multi-billion dollars companies can absolutely do this. Like EA, Ubisoft, BioWare, like these, they can absolutely do this. Right? And again, people are going against this idea that you do not own the games that you're buying. Like, there are like live services that are good games, right? That came out before the cancerous idea of you don't own your games anymore. You're paying for the right to play the game. But again, most of these games also have private modes. Like you can play Warframe in private mode. You can play the First Descendant in private mode. But you even have single player games like Star Wars, the Jedi Knights, The Fallen Order, right? That they're online it also because they have de novo. And again, when they stop supporting that game, a single player fucking game, right? If they stop supporting that game, like, will you own that game? Will you be able to play that single player game simply because you have to be online because de novo DRM? Like, these are the business practices people are raving against. Like, people aren't really trying to thrust more on the developer side because obviously the developers work hard. Like, anyone can understand that. Then developers do a good thing, right? But again, I'm arguing from the side of consumer protection. People want to own and be able to play the things they put their money into. And again, in the early 2000s, I made this point in one of the earlier videos. Like, we had true digital ownership. Yeah, and the problem is you're paying for licenses. You're not playing for the game. Like, that's the problem.
And for you. And it's not hard to do this. We saw the exact same thing happen in TF2 recently.
Yeah,
the massive.
Yeah. See, and that's the point I'm trying to get. Yeah, right. And again, people are shitting on the game because of the bots, because they don't really do anything against it. Because, like, TF2 is in this weird position where it's somewhat abandonware, but I mean, the lights are still on that game somehow and in some way. But yeah, that's just the point I'm trying to make. People shit on the game because of the bots. This isn't one of 2, 3 other steps of things. Like, it's the bots and the fact that Valve just chooses not to support a game that clearly still makes the money, right? And that's what people have a problem with.
Amount of bots that were attacking the game. This is not infeasible. This is something that is very easily attainable today. And let's say that this goes on long enough that your game dies because you can't afford it anymore, and your studio has to shut down. At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional playable state. At which point I take those, I create a private server, and I monetize it. And some people have said, well, simply don't allow monetization of the server. Well, who's going to enforce that?
Well, again, I'd like to see examples of this happening, right? Because indie developers, at least of most indie games I've played, they don't do live service online games. Like, what's the company that made first? Like, that's Nexon that made the first Descendant. Nexon is a big publisher that made other games. Like, what indie company, or at least double A? Well, okay, double A, I guess, would be like Helldivers, right? Like, maybe, but again, did any of this happen to Helldivers? Like, no. I mean, people are just playing other games, and I mean, I don't know what would happen to Helldivers if it went under. But I can tell you what happened to WoW and Battlefield 2142. People made individual private servers, and they made them for free. So if you have a legal purchased copy of that game, you can play that game on those servers. Like, I mean, again, he's arguing from like the side of the small indie developer, but multi-billion-dollar companies are the ones pushing this envelope. They're the ones being like, no, you do not own the things you're buying. You're paying for the right. And again, these companies and these products change hands all the fucking time, right? And again, newer and newer consoles come out all the time. And I find it weird that if you slip in a physical copy of, like, I have the game called 99 Nights, which was made in the Xbox 360 era. But I put in that copy of the game, it still downloads the fucking game, and it's like, why? Well, it's for the reasons that people are arguing against. It's because you don't really own the game. Even if you slip in a functional physical copy of a 360 game, you still need to download the game just to fucking play it. From where? Right? This is what people are arguing against.
If you want a government initiative to enforce that, that means the government has to build a registry of all of those games and all of that intellectual property that shouldn't be monetized, and then somehow enforce that with no one owning it. Because
But they do that anyway. Like, the government absolutely does this. And again, I'm against it. I'm against government working with companies just to shit on the consumer, right? You know, I don't like the fact that this happens, but again, there should be some layer of protection against, again, the multi-billion-dollar company, you know, effectively shorting the consumer and being like, oh, hey, this thing you paid full retail price for, we're just going to take it away from you. Like, there needs to be something to stop that. And what people are saying is, hey, you know, at least what I'm saying is, have a single player campaign, completely offline, completely separate from the game. And Ubisoft can absolutely do this. And again, I want to know what indie devs have an online only game that, again, maybe a couple of like the company that makes Nikke, Gods of Victory, Shift Up. I mean, I don't know, even if that company was to go under, I don't know what would happen to the guy. I mean, I guess you wouldn't technically be able to play the very small, minute multiplayer that you don't gotta do anyway, but it's just there. I mean, I guess maybe you won't get updates, but the thing is still, like, I want to know what indie game developer would have to deal with that, or if situations like that would have happened. I'd want to see proof, because again, we can bring up so many cases of games that you paid full retail price for just not existing. Like, The Crew was one of them. And again, the terms of service is made in the way, right, that you sign in before, even after you purchase the game. you have to press OK to these terms of service. Otherwise, you're locked out of the fucking game, right? The way they're made is in a way that no one reads it, in a way that, yeah, they can absolutely take this away from you. And like you brought up last video, there are reasons, well, this is good. In the case of cheaters, like, yeah, no shit. But just dropping, saying I don't want to play with you anymore to a game that people are playing. I mean, even if it's just 10 fucking people, like, that's idiotic.
Because those studios have shut down. That's going to be a massive burden. On top of that, if you want to go the other route and say the company has to go and control it, well, what if the company's not around anymore? Is that just able to be monetized now? Again, this was obtained through abuse of the original creator. I don't think that's a good route. And this scenario gets even worse if you do.
I mean, if it was a physical game and if it had a multiplayer, I mean, even if the game was completely dropped, I mean, yeah, people would still be able to fucking play it. Again, if you had the physical fucking disc and you didn't have to download oodles of software just to play it, I mean, that's something that, again, in the early 2000s, that's something that could absolutely have been done. But no, now we live in a completely different type of consumption of games where everything's online. Everything, you need to sign a EULA or you have to sign terms of service. Effectively said, for any reason, even if the company goes down or gets sold, you could lose this product, and that's what people are against.
Allow monetization. Because now I can just kill off your company and then monetize the server and no one will ever come after me. Now it's even more of a problem. So,
and again, I mean, people do this for ideological reasons, right? It's what happened to... It was what people tried to do with Stellar Blade, right? Again, it's what people tried to do with the coffin of Andy and Lele, but I also heard that she just gave her product to another what was it, publisher, and they're keeping the game running, right? But again, these things are done for complete ideological it's people on an ideological crusade, and it's shitty, but this is what happens when in the mainstream gaming industry, the consumer isn't the value. Like, you don't gain value for the consumer. You make a product for people on Twitter, for the journalists, right? You don't give the consumer a reason to buy the product. You fleece a product on the market and just to exist, I don't know, suck up ESG money, right? And you give lip service to the mentally unhinged individuals on Twitter, right? Like, yeah, then this is shitty, and I'm against this. But again, I'm arguing from the, the standpoint of the consumer.
So allowing monetization of this work is strictly worse. And for those of you out there that say, oh, this can be done right now, I could just destroy your studio and take your stuff anyway. You could, but this allows a route for it to be legal to do so. That's the problem. After putting this out publicly and talking to people about it, this specific scenario on both YouTube and Discord and Reddit and a bunch of other locations, I got a couple of takes back. We're going to start with the most extreme position and kind of go from there. So, in the most extreme, people said live service games shouldn't exist at all, and the initiative will kill them off for good, and that's a good thing. Well,
yeah, I mean, that's kind of goofy. I mean, live service games, I mean, they're here and they're here to stay, and people play them. My thing is, there absolutely needs to be, protections for the consumer. I don't believe terms of service is like the 10 Commandments, and they should override consumer rights. But yeah, I think that's kind of a dumb standpoint that they just shouldn't exist, right? I mean, I do believe there should be a single player aspects to these games, and it's risks that should be taken upon to ensure that the consumer keeps the product even if the servers go down. But I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Well, you don't get to define what players get to play or not play. You also shouldn't
Yeah,
be able
I
to get to
agree with
define
that.
what developers build or don't build. You should not have creative control over the developers, and you
Well, the consumer kind of does. I mean, the problem is most multi-billion-dollar companies don't care for the consumer. Right? They want to suck up ESG money. They want investor money, and they, you know, launder the mentally ill individuals online to defend their products. So they adopt an ideology to defend these products, and the consumer kind of does. Again, as a consumer, at least this is the way it is on paper. If the consumer likes your game, if people like your game, you're going to make money. If they don't, you don't. I mean, and that's kind of the benchmark right there, or at least it should be. And unless you're a multi-billion-dollar company, then you can absolutely literally spend time, money, and effort just to shit on the consumer, right? But again, as an indie developer, I mean, you are to an extent, and this is something that comes with selling a product. You are to an extent adherent to the consumer. You know, in all actuality, you can make whatever fucking product you want. Like, go right ahead, and in fact, you should. It's a good thing. Like, we need new things. We need interesting things. That's what the market needs. The market doesn't need yet another remake, yet another remaster, yet another prequel, yet another sequel. And I do believe if you make something new, people just buy it out of principle because they're sick and tired of this shit coming out in Western entertainment. It's why they're moving to Eastern entertainment. It's why they're moving to anime. Hell, they're even fucking moving to gotcha games, right? Which all they have are ass and titties, and the gotcha games are not giving people what they want, as opposed to the multi-billion-dollar Western entertainment.
You should not have control over what is in my Steam library or on my phone. That doesn't make any goddamn sense. Aside from that, the initiative does not purport to kill live service games. It would just make it incredibly difficult to build said games and add a lot of risk to it, which is why I'm bringing all of this up and why I don't support the initiative in the first place. A lot of people don't realize that this will slowly diminish live service games in the market because it's not an incentive for us to build them anymore, which means you get less multiplayer live experiences. That sucks. I like live service games. I enjoy playing things like Final Fantasy XIV. I enjoy
Yeah, and I do too. But again, I think that level of risk, I mean, there's some level of risk is important, again, for the sake of the consumer, for the sake of keeping the game, right? You know, I think that risk of protecting the consumer is a good thing. And it's something, you know, most multi-billion-dollar always online games can from those companies can do, you know, instead of putting in time, money, and effort to shit on the consumer, to adopt ideology, which is very expensive, by the way. Like, they hire consultants, people that don't even add to the artistic process. They don't even add to the game. If anything, they're censors. They unilaterally take away, right? Instead of putting money towards that, they should be putting money towards, you know, good single player, even in live service multiplayer games, a good single player experience that, again, even if the live service goes away, even if the multiplayer goes away, you can still argue, yeah, there's still value in this game, and it has to be a good multiplayer. And I guess the benchmark to that would be, I don't know, like Titanfall 2, right? It had an amazing single player, even though the first game was only multiplayer. Like, I'd say that's a good benchmark. And again, if Titanfall 2, if it's multiplayer, which to my knowledge just still has a good multiplayer, even though Apex Legends kind of took most of the people away. Like, again, you have a good 10 hours of single player, you know, different difficulties. That game still has value. It might not have as much value because the multiplayer would be taken away, but that game still has value.
enjoy going and playing in games in the past, at least, like League of Legends. These are games that are live service. They require a live service to run. And you shouldn't be able to take that away from people. And if that's your only position on this, not only are you disingenuous in what the initiative is purporting to try to achieve, but you're also aggressively attacking other players instead of trying to fix something. So the next one is that this is about games preservation, and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations and for everyone to always have forever. But I would argue that this isn't actually preserving these games. Social games, such as, let's say, Apex Legends, require a number of players to be in the match at the same time so that you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interacting, right? It's a multiplayer game. You need a bunch of people. How many of you have felt negatively when an MMO dies or when a live service game dies? Oh, dead game. There's only 5 people online. Why would I play that? So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, if you have a single player, right, you have the multiplayer aspect, and then people go away. But if you have a single player aspect, again, you still have the game still holds intrinsic value. I mean, you could argue most games are expensive now, $70 fucking, but they don't have to pay for the physical. They have to pay for, supply chain or anything. Everything's digital. You can argue games should be cheaper, but I mean, again, if you have a single player aspect, and even if there's only 5 people playing the game, again, I'm being unreasonable. Like I said in the last video, if there's 5 people playing Suicide Squad, they should still be able to play that game. I don't care if it's the multiplayer, single player, I don't care what aspect of the game still exists for those people to still play it. They still should be able to fucking play it. I mean, it's unreasonable, sure. But again, I'm arguing, consumer protection and the product you pay for, you can still play. It still functions. And again, I think how games were in the past, like again Halo, you had the multiplayer, but it had a pretty damn good single player. So I'm not just saying, oh, just add 2, 3, 4 hours of single player and there you go. I mean, I'm talking, effectively, again, what Warframe does, right? Or you can play any mission alone or with people. However you want to play it. Like, there should be something there, and the consumer should still have the product that they paid for with their money.
Want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense. That's not preservation. And for those that may stop there and go, but private servers going to have a lot of players. Look at all the ones for World of Warcraft. Again, we talked about that. It opens up a route for abuse to the developers, so that is not a solution. And the last take that I got from this is, and it's the most reasonable to me, this is an initiative, it's not a law. Why are you upset? Just wait. I'm not going to wait. And the reason I'm not going to wait is because I see the start of this conversation not making sense. It's not including the actual developer side of the conversation. It's not showing the trials and problems that this could arise inside of the gaming industry for people who are actually making the games you play. I don't have any reason to be quiet about that. And many other developers aren't going to be able to speak on this. As I explained before, it's really easy to lose your job if you're working at a major studio and try to speak out of turn on something like this, especially with something people are so passionate about. Doesn't make any sense to stay quiet. And it also doesn't make any sense to wait until it's in a different form when I see that it has so many problems with the language as it is currently written. I should be able to be talking about this. In fact, I should be talking about this.
Yeah, and again, what you are doing is why the petition exists, right? Again, I don't think you should be quiet, stay quiet about it. Like, what you are doing is what the petition was meant to do, have people talk about this, right? But it's from the standpoint of the consumer, right? Maybe later, there'll be a standpoint for the game developer or the producer, but many people are mainly just against multi-billion-dollar companies like Ubisoft, right? We're not raving against game, production or game development as an industry. raging against, the multi-billion dollar game companies that can, for any reason, just yeet a product from your Steam library, right? And again, true digital ownership is something we used to have. Like, this isn't something we're imposing or trying to impose into reality. This is something we used to have. You used to own the games you play, right? And again, the whole getting rid of live service is kind of a dumb take, but I think certain live service games should have a single player element, right, in order to preserve that game, or at least a single player or a private element to that game that people can continue to play. And it doesn't entire. The only difference is whether you play with or without people, right? And World of Warcraft does actually a fairly decent job of keeping the bots and keeping the exploitation down, you know. And the people that work on that, they do this. They do moderate that server, that private server, to ensure people aren't exploiting. And to my knowledge, they're doing a good job, at least for what I'm being told.
I am a content creator specifically that is a game developer that has worked in this industry for 20 years. This is my wheelhouse. This is what I do. So for those who are calling for me to just be silent and sit in the corner, no.
Yeah,
With all
man,
that being
that's
said,
that'd
I
be
do
dumb
think there's
to
a consumer
expect
protection
them to
thing
do
that we
that.
can fix here. It's just not really what the initiative is about. I think that if you're going to buy a live service game, you shouldn't be told you're buying the game. You shouldn't be told that you're purchasing the game. You should be told explicitly that you are purchasing a license to that game. The reason why is
And again, my argument is the fact that you're buying the license. That's the problem. The fact that you're not buying a game is the problem. You're not buying a product. You're not owning a product. Like that's the issue. That's where I'm coming from.
because that license needs to be revoked any time that you are cheating at the game and damaging the play experience of other players. While this is written in the TOS and the EULA, it's usually not clearly defined at point of sale. Or they throw a giant TOS in front of you and it doesn't really do anything because people skip past it. If at point of sale it says specifically, there's specific language stating that you are either leasing or purchasing a license or anything along those lines, that you're not actually buying the game directly, I think it would go a long way to informing consumers of what they're doing and protect them from some of these business practices that...
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, yeah, it should tell you, but again, the fact that that is a thing to me is the problem. But yeah, I mean, if it tells you, hey, you're not actually buying a game, you're buying a license. I mean, it's good, it's helpful, but I still don't like the fact that it's still just a license and not a game. You know, there needs to be some, I guess, single player aspect or some aspect that allows the consumer who paid money for it to be able to consume it, even if, say, the online goes down or the servers go down or the company change hands. Like, that's what I'm arguing, right? And the petition is just, again, from the consumer standpoint. It's not going to have all the correct language, and to my knowledge, it shouldn't. It shouldn't have developer speak or legally speak, because I think that does it an even more disservice than what it should do. Like, the petition, I think, is, and again, the way the guy sold it is just ordinary everyday people, how they can consume the information.
They didn't realize they were engaging it. That makes a lot more sense to me than force all developers to leave the game in a functional, playable state. And that's
But again, I guess the problem is you're not really arguing from where the majority is speaking from. The problem is multi-billion-dollar companies that, again, they inherit IPs from companies. They don't even make the IPs themselves, they inherit them. And for any reason, they can be like, oh, so you bought this? No, you can't have it anymore. We've decreed that you cannot play this product that you've paid full retail price for. Why? Well, because we can. We're the company, you know. And oh hey, you signed an agreement, so you're fine with it. Even though most, like I said, most agreements are made in a way to ensure that you do not read them because they're so fucking long. And I guess you can have a lawyer read them, but I mean, I'm playing a game. I'm not signing up for a fucking loan.
About it. That's all I really wanted to talk about with this. I hope that's clarified some things for some of you and some of the dangers that this can cause as it is currently written. If you're still mad about this, not much I can do about it. Outside of that, I'm going to be gone for the next 4 days, so if you expect...
Yeah, and again, I guess dangerous is kind of a stretch, but I think it smacks open the argument in a way that now people are talking about it. Now, you know, it's on the lips of everyone, and again, it's not supposed to be legally binding. It's supposed to get us talking like it's doing right now, and I think it has achieved that goal. I know, which is my argument. And again, I've nothing against Piratesoftware. It's a good thing that he's a developer. We need more good developers that can kind of be the middleman between the consumer, you know, the normie, and, you know, what devs need to deal with in companies, because devs sign, you know, NDAs and all that. And I think this is a good thing. Like, what we're doing is good. But anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. See ya.